I'm Jay Horton. I make movies that make money. This is how. Today, I'm going to break down the editing process that I'm using on my new horror feature, CRAVING. CRAVING was shot using BMPK 6K RAW full frame, a Blackmagic camera at 6K. The DP added a simple LUT, which is removable in post. We chose to edit in scope 2.39, or 4096 by 1716 is the frame size, which to my eye is a much more cinematic frame than a typical 185. And to my way of thinking, it just works better for this particular project. I'm editing on an older Mac Pro trash can. It's got 3 gigahertz, 8 core, 64 gigs of RAM, and I'm using external hard drives. It's not the newest or most robust system out there by any stretch of the imagination, but believe it or not, it can still edit that 6K footage without proxies with almost no hiccups. Now, I do sometimes have to res down to like 1/8 resolution, but I found it preferable to proxies. I just don't like them. So the first thing I did was to go through all the raw data and double check the folder and file names. I do not like to change the raw file names at all. And on the home drives, I do not. But once I pull a folder into Premiere, which is the program I'm using, I do add prefixes with the take numbers to every clip and a short description so I can more easily identify them within the program. That way, just at a quick glance, I basically know what the shot is. So my first step is to go through every shot and do this naming. So I'm reviewing the shot and I'm naming it. This also doubles as the first time off set that I'm really looking at everything. I'll make some notes if something jumps out to me, but honestly, I do very few at this stage. I'm really just trying to take it all in and get an overall sense of what I actually have. Now, at the same time, I also do all of my syncing. Whether I have a slate or not, I usually sync with Premiere's Waveform Syncing tool. This works on about 98% of the clips. The rest I'll just eyeball. I know that it can be much more efficient to batch sync using timecode, but honestly, I just don't like doing it that way. I'm a little old school and I like to review every clip. In the case of CRAVING, a decision was made in pre-production by me and the DP to not use slates. Say what? Oh my God, are you insane? That's one of the first things you learn about in film school, slates. And yes, thank you, over-exuberant film student. It does help. Slates do help. It saves a bunch of time in post, and it can help in many ways. Even when the director is the editor, it's a huge post-production time saver to use slates. So why on earth would one ever decide not to use a slate? Well, here's the thing. I am the editor. I am the assistant editor. When it comes to post-production on this little $60,000, $70,000 movie, I am the only person that's being inconvenienced or having to spend more time because there weren't slates. The only person that'll be inconvenienced is me. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to production, every little delay costs not only time, but money. And when you include the costs of cast, crew, location, etc., it can add up to a lot of money. Now, some will say, but it only takes a few seconds to slate a take, and that is true. But in this particular case, I had a very small crew. Only 3 people in total on the camera team, and 2 of them were operating cameras 99% of the time, and the other was acting as a gaffer/grip/AC. If we were using a slate, that gaffer, grip/AC would have to quickly, in a matter of seconds, adjust a light, slate the take, set the slate down, go back, adjust another light, and then go. Plus, keep track of the slates and what take it is and all that stuff. Now, is that doable? Sure. I've done it like that on many productions, but it would have ate up time that we didn't have. And that's not to mention like misplacing the slate or misplacing the marker, or people arguing about how the take should be labeled. Should it be, scene 37A1 or should it be 37B1? Or is this take 2? I don't know. And the budget on this one was so tight that we absolutely could not afford another camera assistant. So we decided to forego slating. And quite honestly, I don't think we would have got everything in that we did if we had have slated. Now, several years ago, this would have made post-production virtually impossible. But with today's nonlinear editing programs like Premiere, you can sync by waveforms. And as long as the cameras are rolling some kind of source sound, it's fairly easy to sync all the files without a slate. I just made sure that each day both cameras and sound were using the same naming conventions and all the files were in consecutive numbered order. Now, do not get me wrong. I am not saying that this is the way to go. In fact, I would never recommend this for other filmmakers, especially less experienced ones. But here's the deal. I have been editing for over 20 years, directing just as long. I can make sense of a slateless mess of files. Others' experiences with trying this will vary. But here's the important takeaway that I want people to understand. Slates are super helpful and important. But if you're making a little tiny movie and you are indeed an experienced director and editor, you can probably make it without. I know editors all around the world are watching this like, what the is this jackass saying? Anyway, once I finished syncing the movie, which took me about 3 days, I spread that out over about 2 weeks. I was still kind of recuperating from the shoot. I was ready to start editing. Now, there's no right or wrong way to approach editing a feature. Some work beginning to end. Some cherry pick scenes and start there. For me, I'm a beginning to end kind of guy. So I start with the first scene and I move forward chronologically. I call my first pass my kitchen sink assembly. I just put everything together as fast as I can. I throw shots together, usually the first one that I can find that works for the scene to tell the story. I call it a kitchen sink assembly because I try to use all the existing coverage that there is. I don't scrutinize the technical details or the performances in this go-around. I'm basically looking to see, are the basic pieces there to tell my story? Is the overall pacing working? What sections are going to need the most work, etc. This process on CRAVING took me about 2 weeks. Fun fact about me, I've been making movies for so long, and many I've had to do under extreme time pressures, so I'm pretty good at this type of editing. Usually, when I finish my kitchen sink cut, it more closely resembles someone else's rough cut. But this is also the worst the movie will ever look, and it can be a dangerous time for an editor. It's easy to lose hope or confidence in a project when viewing your initial cuts. This is also why I rarely show people this stage of the edit. Both visually and dramatically, in the case of CRAVING, I've started using some sound effects and temp music as well at this stage. Not every scene, but on the ones where I knew music or sound effects would be crucial, I start to experiment here. Once I'm done with the kitchen sink assembly, I then turn to the most important part of the editing process for me, fine-tuning the performances. At this point, I go back into all the raw takes, not just my circled ones, and watch them all again. I start out by looking at the scene edited as is, and I start looking at every variation of performance I can think of. This is where I really start to shape the performances. This also happens to be the longest part of the process for me. I also, at this stage, pay almost no attention to continuity or how the shots look, unless they make the actor look really bad when they shouldn't. I focus 100% at this point on just the performances, getting them right or as close to right as I can while ignoring most of the film school rulebook shit. Once the performance cut is done, I move on to what I call the reconciliation cut. This is where I start to reconcile what I want from the performances and the story with what works technically, basically smoothing out all the rough edits. As a filmmaker and a viewer, I value performance and story way over any technical concerns. If there are 2 takes that together give the best performance, but say there's something slightly off in the background, or the actor's physical continuity is slightly off, or there's a slight camera bump, I will go with the better performance take every time, unless the technical error is just very egregious. And I follow pretty much the same tact when it comes to building suspense, humor, or tone. To me, those are all the big important things. As a younger filmmaker, I was way more continuity focused. And I remember one time watching the commentary for Swingers, and the editor was talking about how it was his first film, and he was doing a scene in a cafe with Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau and two other guys. And he said it was just a nightmare continuity wise. Like one take, Vince Vaughn would have a hat on. Next take, the hat would be off. One take, he would have a cigar in his hand. Next take, the cigar would be gone. Water and glasses, it is different things. It was just a mess continuity wise. And he said the director basically just told him, he's like, forget about all that. Just get the best performance, get the best take, and let's just do it. And they put it together, and the scene is a mess continuity wise. And I had probably seen Swingers at that point, I don't know, half a dozen times. I really liked the movie, and I never noticed it until he pointed it out in the commentary. So it just goes to show you, I'm not saying that continuity is not important, but performance trumps it every time. Or take a look at Casino. There's a shot in there of Sharon Stone, and the camera kind of floats down on her on the bed, right? And she just gives this incredible performance there. And there's a slight camera bump. And it's freaking Scorsese. Like, they had to have done a take where the camera didn't bump. You know it. But at some point, he was like, this moment was pure magic for her. And he chose her performance over the technical aspects, and she won an Oscar for it. Now, all of this is not to say that I completely ignore filmmaking guidelines. I'm very aware of them, and I do follow them whenever I can. But when things go wrong, as they often will, I will choose performance and story over anything else. Sorry, end of rant. Once my reconciliation cut is done, I'll take a few days off from the edit and then watch everything again. This is the point where I start to take notes from other collaborators. Prior to this point, I just really don't like notes. They just get in my head, and they're rarely useful in the early stages of the process. In over 20 years of working in this industry, I have met only a handful of producers that can actually give good assembly notes. So I usually just don't show it to anyone until I get past my reconciliation cut. And as I said before, these rougher stages of the movie are where the movie is at its worst. It feels its worst. And I've had otherwise good producers in the past write off really good projects at this stage because they just didn't really understand what they were looking at. So it's not till I finish the reconciliation cut, or what others would call a rough cut, where I'll start to show other producers or filmmakers that I trust for notes. And all of that said, I still usually try and save at least one producer on the team to not see anything till it gets to the next stage, which is color and score. Because with multiple viewings, filmmakers do start to lose objectivity. And it's good to have at least one pair of fresh eyes as you get closer to the end. After I show it to a few people, I take in all those notes and I apply what makes sense. I ignore the rest, and I start to put together my final director's edit. In the case of CRAVING, I have Final Cut, and the director's edit will be the final word. Once I lock this version to my satisfaction, I start preparing the edit for the composer and colorist. Then I work on something else while they do their things. Once I get back the color and sound, I do one last polishing pass to make any necessary changes that might have become necessary with the addition of the score. And I typically like to conform the work done by the composer and colorist myself if possible, and export my final locked version of the film. The whole process for something like this would usually be like 8 to 12 weeks. But with another leg of production that'll be stuck in the middle, it's harder to plan for. Now, this has just been a general overview of my editing process. I'll go into prepping deliverables and cutting trailers and promotional material in a later video. So keep an eye out for those. But whatever you do, keep making movies.